Back here on HQ Spotlight, college football is almost here, and you are taking a look at Chip Patterson's CFP bracket prediction. Penn State, he has them getting the 1 seed and also a bye, of course. Also getting a bye, Ohio State, Texas, and Bama. And I believe there are 5 SEC teams in here: A&M, Ole Miss, Georgia, Bama, and Texas, which is a very stark contrast from Chip's podcast co-host, Danny Cannell, who I think had like 2 SEC teams getting into his CFP bracket prediction. That is par for the course for Danny Cannell, who loves the ACC. So let's welcome in Chip Patterson here. Chip, you're going to walk us through this round by round, and ultimately we're going to crown a champion. We are starting in the first round with an all-SEC matchup with A&M and Ole Miss. So who pulls through here?
Yeah, former SEC West rivals that don't play this year because of that bloated SEC schedule. I'm going to give Ole Miss the chance to advance here after their first college football playoff appearance. And a lot of this is my faith in Austin Simmons coming to take over that offense. I think that Ole Miss has a situation that they haven't had in a while, where they've got a quarterback that they did not get from the transfer portal, but instead one that they signed right out of high school. And so I think that for Lane Kiffin, what we will see with Austin Simmons is the true realization of what his Ole Miss offense can be. Think about everything Jackson Dart did. I think Austin Simmons can chase some of those records. I've got the Rebels advancing to the quarterfinals.
All right, so Ole Miss is moving on. Let's continue to another first-round matchup. We always have like a Cinderella story, right? Like a group of 5 team, whether it was Boise State last season. This season, you have Tulane getting in as a 12 seed, and they get a pretty tough task in facing Georgia in your CFP bracket prediction. Does this magical run end here for Tulane, or does it continue, Chip?
Yeah, Georgia might have issues in New Orleans, but this is going to be in Athens, as, of course, that first round is played on campus for the higher seed. Georgia is just a much more talented roster, and the Bulldogs should have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. Remember, Jacqueline, a one-and-done showing in the college football playoff last year? We almost forget that the Bulldogs won the SEC because of how short their time was in the CFP. I think they will be properly motivated and showcase that talent gap with the first-round win.
I love when Chip talks about a chip on teams' shoulders. There's nothing like that analysis. All right, another first-round matchup. We have Texas Tech taking on Clemson, where we know Cade Klubnik, the quarterback, has very high expectations. So who moves on here?
Yeah, the Tigers actually having a first-round game was a bit of a bold prediction on my part. I think Clemson will win the ACC, but I think that they might find themselves behind the Big Ten and the SEC in the seeding, but that does give them a very advantageous foe, Texas Tech, coming out of the Big 12, because while Clemson does have a talent and experience advantage, it will also have, much like Georgia, a home field advantage. And I think we're going to see when LSU goes to the upstate coming up in week 1 exactly what that building can be like. So give me Clemson in Death Valley against the newcomers to the CFP, the Texas Tech Red Raiders.
All right, and the final first-round matchup here with Oregon and Notre Dame. Both of these squads have kind of an unproven quarterback situation, but it doesn't mean that the expectations are any lower for either team here, Chip. Who do you have advancing? Is it Oregon or is it Notre Dame?
Great shout on the quarterback situation, Jacqueline, because I think this is a game where the team that can run the football better will emerge victorious, and that's where Notre Dame and Jeremiah Love are going to end up rising to the occasion. We saw the Fighting Irish in an electric environment in South Bend for a first-round game 1 year ago. I think they'll get it again, and they can just run the football in that cold mid-December weather, and I think that Oregon will end up finding it difficult to have the similar success.
Oh, man. So Oregon gets a bye last season, doesn't find success. They don't get a bye this season, and they're out at this point, according to this prediction. So here are all the matchups that we have so far. If we move on to the quarterfinals, we have Ole Miss, Penn State, Georgia, Ohio State, Clemson, and Texas, and then Notre Dame at Bama. So let's start at the very top, Chip, with Ole Miss and Penn State, where there are very, very high expectations for the Nittany Lions. Who moves out and advances over to the semis?
I've got Drew Aller answering the critics and showing up on a big stage against a quality opponent. One of the great wrinkles for Penn State this year is that I think offensively, they could be better than they've been in the James Franklin era. I don't think they will have to be that good or that elite to win football games every single week because of their advantage against most of their schedule. But going up against Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss, that's where they will need offensive coordinator Andy Kotelnicki to go deep in his bag and pull out everything that he can to be able to keep that defense off balance. Look for Coach K, as they call him, and Drew Aller to be the real stars for a Penn State win.
All right, so Penn State advances to the semis here. Next up, we have a battle of two powerhouse programs with Kirby Smart and UGA, of course, and Ryan Day and Ohio State. I'm kind of hoping this actually comes to fruition because it's going to be pretty awesome, but who do you have moving forward?
Jacqueline, copy and paste that statement right there, because as we get deeper into these simulations, I'm like, yes, sign me up for this matchup right now. In this particular matchup, I do think this is where Georgia might not quite have everything that they need yet to be able to compete with Ohio State. What I mean by that is the Bulldogs roster is very, very young, very, very inexperienced. And that's where I think that even though Ohio State lost a lot off last year's national championship roster, I think their offensive line is much improved and even better. That will help out their quarterback, who I do think will be Julian Sayin. And at this point, I am expecting another star-studded performance from the player who I think might win the Heisman Trophy, and that would be Jeremiah Smith. So give me the Buckeyes advancing.
All right, you talk about Jeremiah Smith being in the Heisman conversation in that matchup. This next matchup, we have two guys that are, I think, within the top 3 odds to win the Heisman at this moment in time, in Arch Manning and Cade Klubnik. We have a 6 versus 3 matchup in Clemson against Texas. And Chip, this is where things are going to get a little spicy here for the predictions.
Yeah, and a rematch of a first-round game from last year, a sneaky competitive game between Clemson and Texas, and you hinted at it right there. I do have an upset. I've got Arch being one and done as QB1. I've got Cade Klubnik and a more experienced and older set of veteran stars for the Tigers going in and taking care of business, and I just think that Dabo Swinney and his staff will be able to call back to those early wins, those big stage victories against an LSU, an Ohio State, and Alabama. That's what I'm looking for from this year's Tigers team. So I've got Clemson making the semifinals.
All right, Clemson gets in as a 6 seed. Next up, we have Notre Dame. They move forward, and they're facing a rested Bama team, right? So we have Marcus Freeman against Kalen DeBoer. So is Marcus Freeman gonna continue on in this magical CFP run and build upon last season, or are we going to see Kalen DeBoer move things along?
Yeah, I think this is where Notre Dame won't have the offense to keep up with Alabama, because I think that Alabama is really going to benefit from the return of offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb. I think that Ty Simpson's going to have a phenomenal year with a great group of wide receivers, an absolute hammer of a running back in Jam Miller. I am projecting Alabama to win the SEC in order to land in this seeding, and I think that if that team does win the SEC, they are much more well-rounded on both sides of the ball than Notre Dame. I've got the Crimson Tide winning this one handily.
All right, so we have our semifinals matchup set. So let's take a look here as Chip sees it. We have Penn State and Ohio State in a bowl game together, and then the other semifinal in the CFP is Clemson in Alabama. So let's start at the top here with Penn State and Ohio State. It's interesting when we look at the coaches, Chip, because we've heard, multiple times, Ryan Day, can he show up in the big moments? Can he do it? He finally does it. And now we're saying the same thing about James Franklin. Can he show up in the big moments? His record against, AP top 5 teams, yada, yada. So now he is facing a big team in Ohio State. So who moves forward to the championship game?
Yeah, and it might be the 3rd time that they've played in a single season. They meet in the regular season in Columbus. They might play for the Big Ten championship game as well, and they very well could wind up facing off against each other in the college football playoff. Remember, a Drew Aller interception might have prevented us from seeing this as the national championship game last year. Well, I think that Penn State has a better team right now, more prepared to go blow for blow with Ohio State than if they had made the national championship game. I've got the Penn State Nittany Lions doing another huge step in this dream season and getting past the Buckeyes and being able to make it to the championship game. I mean, we go from James Franklin can't win the big one. Now I'm saying James Franklin's going to win like 5 big ones in a row. I mean, clearly I am lost in the Penn State sauce, but it's just the way I see it as we prepare for week 1.
All it takes is one season, right? You know, Ryan Day, we always talked about it, and he finally, wins the big championship. And now, I mean, maybe we've moved on. I say that, and then who knows? After week 1 against Texas, it's going to be like, panic if they lose, right? Let's go to the other semifinal matchup with Clemson and Bama. So who is going to be taking on Penn State here, Chip?
I've got Alabama advancing. I think that this is going to be such an awesome chapter of that Clemson-Alabama rivalry, which has been existing back to 2015. But I think that in this particular matchup, the overall talent level is a slight advantage to the Crimson Tide. I think they've got depth in a way that the Clemson Tigers just don't have depth right now. And so, yeah, what you're looking at is that my big bet on Alabama, that they would be the 2 seed, the SEC champion, that they'd be able to back up that successful season with a successful playoff run. Because don't forget, Jacqueline, that it was that head coach, Kalen DeBoer, who has been in the national championship game before. So I think he can get the Tide there again.
All right, there you have it. Chip's national championship prediction is Penn State and Alabama. So is it James Franklin and Penn State finally getting it done, or are we going to see Kalen DeBoer and Alabama get their first natty in the post-Nick Saban era? Which is it, Chip?
It's Penn State getting it done for the first undisputed national championship since 1986, the most successful season since 1994. This is if you ain't going to do it now, I don't know when you're going to do it, but I think that Penn State ultimately has that X factor advantage of a group of veterans that could have gone pro and decided to come back. It reminds me of Ohio State's motivation going into 2024. It reminds me of Michigan's motivation going into 2023. In this playoff era, sometimes you just need to be knocking on the door, bring everybody back, and then you can take the next step. As I mentioned, they were just a turnover away from playing for the national championship a year ago. I've got Penn State getting to the title game and winning it, giving the Big Ten 1, 2, 3 national championships in a row.
I was going to say it's the first time in a long time that a single conference has gotten 3 natties in a row. But Chip sees it happening with Penn State beating Bama to win it all. Chip, we certainly appreciate it as you give us your CFP prediction. By the way, you can hear Chip on the Cover 3 podcast. You can watch right now by scanning that QR code on your screen.